Hello everyone, it's Steve with Aptera Owners Club. This video is a little bit like the one where we talked about the cost of infrastructure in the United States. And one of the reasons that I think that infrastructure is hard to build in the United States and there's not much public support for it is because so few people use public transit and that kind of infrastructure. So therefore, when the majority of the population doesn't use it, it's not important. But we do have public transit in the United States. And this is what I see most of the time. Whenever I see a bunch of buses going around my town, and whenever I look in them, it's either completely empty or there's one or two people in there. And so they look like this, where there's just an entire bus with a couple of people, or there's a train with like one person in there. And this is just a colossal waste of money because these are billion-dollar projects. They cost millions of dollars a year to run, and you have very few people taking advantage of all this money that we've already spent. But you were still having to pay the people to run the buses and run the trains. We're still having to maintain them, and no one's getting any benefit out of it. So I read a couple of articles recently talking about the case for making public transit free. And this is something that's catching on. Obviously, most of it started in Europe, but it's catching on in America as well. And there's several reasons why making public transit free might be a good idea. One is that the cost. Okay, so number one, you can't have free public transit. Someone has to pay for it. And it's obviously being paid for with some combination of taxes and fares. And fares in a way are sort of like taxes as well. So in the United States, most of our public transit systems, the fares account for around 10% of the cost of running the system. So 90% of the cost of running the system is paid for by taxes, by people that are not really using the public transit. And it seems like maybe we should make the fares 100% and not have any public money going to public transit. But if that were the case, you would have to charge people like $100,000 per bus ride because there's only one person riding it. And obviously no one's going to pay that kind of money for a bus ride. But public transit is a common good, much like there's a lot of things that we pay for with taxes that we don't ever use or we hope not to use in some cases. So there's things like public schools. So there's people that don't have children or they send their kids to private schools, but we all pay for public schools because we realize that having an educated population is generally a good thing. You want kids to be literate and be able to do math and things like that. And then public libraries. Not everyone uses public libraries, but we've all agreed, or most of us have agreed, that having public libraries is probably a good thing. And then, fire stations. We hope to never use a fire, hope never to need firefighter services, but we all pay for them. And it's not like when your house starts burning, they come to you and you have to pay the entire cost of the system because now you're using them, because that would cost a ridiculous amount. And so there's a lot of things that we've decided are public goods and we pay for ourselves. This is one of the quotes I like by Oliver Wendell Holmes. He was a Republican Supreme Court justice in the early 1900s. His quote was, "I like to pay taxes. With them, I buy civilization." So, I mean, no one really likes to pay taxes, but having like a society that works well and civilization where you don't have anarchy and you have things that work, then it makes you feel like, okay, this is what we're buying with taxes. All right. And then the other thing is that most of the conflict another reason that maybe public transit being free would be a good idea is that most of the conflict between transit workers and the public are over fares. So if you get rid of fares, then you get rid of a lot of the conflict between the workers and the consumers, which makes everyone happier. And then more public transit use means less traffic and less pollution, which helps people that don't use public transit. So everyone benefits from less traffic and better air and less pollution. And then most transit fares are the most regressive way to collect revenue. So when you want to, if you want poor people to pay a proportionally larger part of the revenue, then you should just increase transit fares or sales tax or gas taxes. These things affect poor people more than they do rich people. Wages and salaries are kind of in the middle. If you tax capital gains, estate taxes, and corporate income tax, you tend to tax more rich people. I'm not really sure what this fair share amendment is. This is probably some kind of tax plan to tax wealthy people even more, probably something like a wealth tax or something like that. But generally, we think of regressive taxes as bad things because you're trying to move the tax burden onto the people that can least afford it. And transit fares basically are, we're asking poorer people who are trying to get to work, and we're charging them more money because they're the ones who are using the public transit system most likely, and they're the ones who are having to pay more of the share of that by having transit fares. So by making the public transit be paid for by other taxes, you take away this kind of regressive tax. So a lot of countries have already done it. Luxembourg and Malta have already made all their public transit system free. Now, they are both very small countries and actually pretty wealthy countries. So from a finance standpoint, it wasn't that big of a deal for them. And then a couple of cities have done it. This is Tallinn, Estonia. I've never been there, but it looks amazing. I'd like to visit there sometime. They have made their entire public transit system free, and it's worked out quite well for them. This is a city of about 500,000. There's another city called Hasselt, Belgium. They've also made their public transit free. Also, Kansas City has made their public transit free since about 2018, I think. So Kansas City has made it free, and it's been a big success for them as well. Several U.S. cities, including like Denver, Boston, and a few others are considering, San Francisco, I believe, are considering free or partially free public transit systems. And I think that makes a lot of sense because when you have a system that's like this, where you're paying 90% of the cost anyway and no one's using it, why not make it 100% paid for by other tax revenue and make it free so that people will actually use it? More people are going to use it if it's free. And then as ridership goes up, then you can start increasing fares. So it's basically like market. There's supply and demand. There's a lot of supply, and with the cost, when you don't have, if you decrease the cost, there'll be more demand for it. So if you decrease it to free, then more people will use it. Now, what is the reason that you may not want to do it? Well, so once public transit becomes popular and lots of people use it, then the fares start becoming a larger proportion of your operating cost, and then you do need fares. So for New York City, New York City is probably the most widely used public transit system in the United States. And in their system, the fares account for a little over 30% of their operating costs. So therefore, you can't remove 30% of your operating costs by making it free. So places like New York City, you can't remove the fares completely. So I think in most of the country, the public transit's way underutilized. You should make it free until the ridership goes up, and then you can ramp up the fares until the supply meets the demand. The other thing is when they ran some studies from some cities that did trials of free public transit, what they noticed is what happened was a lot of people that used to walk and bike, then they started using the public transit rather than people that used to drive using public transit. And what you really want is you want people that used to drive to use public transit, and the people who are walking and cycling to continue walking and cycling, because walking and cycling is even better than public transit in terms of pollution and energy costs, and probably for like community engagement in the city. So we want to not discourage walking and cycling. Those are the kind of the two best ways of getting around. And we want to try to shift people that were driving, especially driving by themselves in a car, into public transit, because that will decrease traffic the most. Getting people away from cycling and walking doesn't help with traffic, and it doesn't help with pollution. So that is a major concern. And so you probably, the best way, if you wanted to do it from a fiscal standpoint, is to somehow get the revenue, the extra 10% of the revenue that you would lose from the fares, and get that from drivers, and try to that would maybe incentivize drivers to move to public transit, because driving would become a little bit more expensive that way. Oh, the last thing that I forgot to mention is that in most of the public transit systems in the United States, the cost of collecting the fare, which means like hiring people to collect the fares, setting up systems to collect fares, that cost is more than the fares that are collected, because you have a situation like this. I mean, when you have 2 or 3 people riding the bus and they're paying the fares, you still have to set up the system and the cards and the computing system and the IT system and all that thing to collect the fares, but you're not collecting that many fares. But if you have a system where a lot of people are using it, well, then the cost of the fare collection system pays for itself, because enough people are using it, if that makes sense. So having fares in low usage areas actually costs more than not having fares, which seems counterintuitive, but is actually true. Okay, well, tell me what you guys think in the comments below. Do you think that free public transit makes sense? Or, do you think having a situation like this is a good idea, where basically no one's using this system and we're just paying for empty buses to drive around their routes? I just think it's a total waste. All right. Well, tell me what you guys think in the comments below. Tell me if you agree or disagree with me. Thanks for watching. Have a great day, guys.